The dusty streets of Silver Peak, Nevada had never felt so cruel as they did on that scorching August morning in 1882 when Nora Jane Jenkins watched her father load her single carpetbag onto the back of their wagon with hands that trembled not from age but from fury. She stood on the porch of the only home she had ever known, one hand pressed protectively against her still flat belly, the other clutching the door frame as though she could somehow anchor herself to this place, to the life she had known before everything shattered like glass beneath a boot heel. Her mother refused to even look at her. Elizabeth Jenkins stood rigid as a fence post in the doorway, her face turned away, her mouth pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Nora's 3 younger sisters huddled behind their mother's skirts, confusion and fear mingling in their young eyes. They did not understand why their beloved older sister was being sent away, only that something terrible and shameful had occurred. "Papa, please," Nora whispered, her voice breaking. "Please do not do this. I have nowhere to go." Her father, Thomas Jenkins, finally turned to face her. His weathered face, usually so gentle despite the hardness of frontier life, had transformed into something unrecognizable. The man who had taught her to ride, who had lifted her onto his shoulders to see the 4th of July fireworks, who had called her his little songbird, was gone. In his place stood a stranger whose eyes burned with righteous indignation. "You should have thought of that before you spread your legs for that no-good drifter," he said, each word landing like a physical blow. "You have brought shame upon this family, upon your mother and sisters. I will not have a whore living under my roof." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and final. Nora felt something inside her chest crack open, a wound so deep she wondered if it would ever heal. She wanted to scream at him that it had not been like that Robert had promised to marry her, that she had believed his pretty words about love and forever. But Robert had disappeared the moment she had told him about the baby, vanishing like morning dew under the harsh Nevada sun, and her protestations would change nothing now. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "That is no longer my concern," her father replied. "You made your choice. Now you must live with the consequences. I am taking you to town. After that, you are on your own." The 15-minute wagon ride into Silver Peak proper passed in suffocating silence. Her father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Nora sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, trying desperately not to cry. She had already cried so much over the past week since her condition had been discovered. Her eyes felt raw and swollen. Her throat ached from sobbing into her pillow at night. She would not give her father the satisfaction of seeing her break down now. Silver Peak was already bustling with morning activity when they arrived. Miners heading to the silver operations that gave the town its name, shopkeepers opening their establishments, women in proper dresses and bonnets conducting their errands, normal people living normal lives, none of them facing the complete destruction of everything they had ever known. Her father pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. Without a word, he grabbed her carpetbag and dropped it unceremoniously onto the wooden sidewalk. The thud it made seemed impossibly loud. "Papa," Nora tried one last time, reaching for his arm. "Please, I am still your daughter." He jerked away from her touch as though she had burned him. "I have no daughter," he said flatly. Then he clicked his tongue at the horses and drove away without looking back. Nora stood frozen on the sidewalk, her carpetbag at her feet, watching the wagon disappear down the dusty street. Around her she could feel eyes beginning to turn in her direction. Silver Peak was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. By now, word of her disgrace had surely spread through the community like wildfire. She could already hear the whispers starting, could see the way Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house clutched her daughter's arm and steered her to the other side of the street. She had perhaps $20 to her name, money she had saved from selling eggs and doing mending work. It would not last long. She needed a place to stay, needed to find work, but who would hire her once they knew? Who would rent a room to an unwed pregnant woman? The morning sun beat down mercilessly, and Nora felt sweat beginning to trickle down her spine. Her gray traveling dress, which had seemed appropriate when she had put it on before dawn, now felt suffocating. She picked up her carpet bag, the weight of it making her arm ache, and began walking with no real destination in mind. She had made it perhaps half a block when a deep voice behind her said, "Miss Jenkins?" Nora turned to find herself face to face with Matthew Quinn, one of the local cowboys who worked at the sprawling Double R Ranch just outside town. She knew him by sight, had seen him at church socials and town gatherings, though they had never spoken more than a few polite words in passing. He was a tall man in his mid-20s, broad-shouldered, and lean-hipped in the way of men who spent their days in the saddle. His sun-bronzed face was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and startling blue eyes that seemed to see more than most people's. Dark hair curled slightly beneath his worn Stetson. "Mr. Quinn," she acknowledged quietly, acutely aware of how she must look, standing alone on the street with all her worldly possessions in a single bag. He removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest. "Forgive me for being forward, Miss Jenkins, but I could not help but notice that you seem to be in some difficulty. Is there anything I can do to assist you?" The kindness in his voice, so unexpected after the brutality of her father's rejection, nearly undid her completely. She felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes and had to blink rapidly to hold them back. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Quinn, but I'm afraid my situation is beyond assistance," she said, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. Matthew Quinn's blue eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. She had done nothing wrong, she told herself fiercely, even as shame burned through her veins. She had been foolish, had trusted the wrong man, but she had not committed some unforgivable sin. "I heard what happened," Matthew said quietly, and there was no judgment in his tone, only a gentle understanding that made something in Nora's chest loosen slightly. "And I want you to know that I do not believe you deserve to be treated the way your father has treated you." "You are one of very few who would say such a thing," Nora replied bitterly. She glanced around and saw several townspeople watching them with undisguised curiosity and disapproval. "You should not be seen speaking with me, Mr. Quinn. It will damage your reputation." Instead of backing away as she expected, Matthew took a step closer. "I do not give a damn about my reputation," he said, his voice low and fierce. "What I care about is that there is a young woman standing alone on this street with nowhere to go and no one to help her. That does not sit right with me." Nora stared at him, bewildered by this unexpected champion. "Why do you care? You do not even know me." "I know enough," Matthew said. "I know that you used to teach Sunday school to the little children before all this happened. I know that you have a beautiful singing voice, and that you always contributed pies to the church fundraisers. I know that when old Mrs. Patterson was ill last winter, you went to her house every day for 2 weeks to help care for her. That tells me what kind of person you are." The tears Nora had been fighting spilled over then, tracking hot paths down her cheeks. "That does not change what I did," she whispered. "It does not change the fact that I'm pregnant and unmarried and completely alone in this world." Matthew reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and gently wiped the tears from her face with his thumb. His hand was calloused and warm, and the tenderness of the gesture made Nora's breath catch. "What if you were not unmarried?" he asked softly. Nora's mind struggled to process his words. "I do not understand." "Marry me," Matthew said. "Today, right now. We will go to the preacher and make it legal, and then you will not be alone anymore." For a moment, Nora was certain she had misheard him. "You cannot be serious," she breathed. "I am completely serious," Matthew assured her. His blue eyes held hers with an unwavering intensity. "I know this is sudden, and I know we barely know each other, but I cannot stand by and watch you suffer when I have the power to help you. Marry me, Nora. Let me give you and your baby my name and my protection." "But why would you do such a thing?" Nora asked, her voice trembling. You could have your pick of unmarried girls in this town, girls who are not carrying another man's child. Why would you saddle yourself with me and my shame?" Matthew's jaw tightened. "Because I have seen too many people in this world get kicked when they are down, because I believe in helping those who need it, and because—" He paused, his voice softening. "I have admired you from afar for a long time now, Nora Jenkins. I never had the courage to court you properly, but maybe fate is giving me a chance to do right by you now." Nora's head was spinning. This could not be happening. Men did not simply propose marriage to ruined women out of the goodness of their hearts. There had to be some catch, some ulterior motive she was not seeing. "I have nothing to offer you," she said desperately. "No dowry, no prospects, just a scandal and a baby that is not yours." "I do not need a dowry," Matthew said firmly. "I have a good job at the Double R, and I have been saving my wages. I recently purchased a small piece of land just outside town where I'm building a house. It is not finished yet, but the main structure is sound. There is room enough for a family." He took both her hands in his grip strong and steady. "I am not asking you to love me, Nora. I am simply offering you a way out of this impossible situation. Marry me and you will have a home and a name for your child. That baby deserves a chance at a decent life, does it not?" The mention of the baby, the tiny life growing inside her that she already loved with a fierceness that terrified her, broke through Nora's resistance. Matthew was right. Her child deserved better than to be born a bastard, to grow up bearing the shame of circumstances beyond its control. If she refused Matthew's offer, what options did she have? The boarding house would not take her. No respectable family would hire her as a domestic. She would end up in one of the rough mining camps outside town, working in a saloon or worse just to survive. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" she asked, searching his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. "You understand what you would be taking on?" "I understand completely," Matthew said without wavering. "And I am certain." Nora drew in a shaky breath. Every practical bone in her body told her to accept this miracle, this lifeline being thrown to her when she was drowning. And yet, a small part of her balked at the idea of entering into marriage under such circumstances. It felt wrong somehow, like she would be taking advantage of this man's kindness. "I would be in your debt for the rest of my life," she said quietly. "I do not want your debt," Matthew replied. "I want to help you. Please, Nora, let me do this." She looked into his earnest blue eyes and made her decision. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." The relief that washed over Matthew's face was so profound it took her breath away. He squeezed her hands gently, then picked up her carpet bag as though it weighed nothing at all. "Come on, then," he said with a smile that transformed his serious face into something warm and almost boyish. "Let us go find Reverend Marsh and make you Nora Quinn." The walk to the small white church at the end of Main Street took only a few minutes, but to Nora it felt like crossing into an entirely different life. With each step, she left behind the girl who had been Nora Jenkins and moved toward becoming someone new. Matthew walked beside her, matching his long stride to her shorter one, his presence solid and reassuring. Reverend Marsh was in his small office behind the church, working on Sunday's sermon. He looked up in surprise when Matthew knocked on the open door. "Matthew Quinn," the Reverend said warmly, rising from his desk. "What brings you here on a Thursday morning?" Then his eyes fell on Nora, and his expression shifted to one of wary concern. "Miss Jenkins." "Reverend Marsh," Matthew said before the older man could say anything else, "Miss Jenkins and I would like you to marry us, today, if possible." The Reverend's bushy gray eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. "Marry you? Today?" "Yes, sir," Matthew confirmed. "I know it is unusual, but we have our reasons, and they are sound ones. Will you perform the ceremony?" Reverend Marsh looked between them, his weathered face troubled. Nora held her breath, waiting for him to refuse, to lecture them about the impropriety of a hasty marriage. But then something in the Reverend's expression softened, and he nodded slowly. "I assume this has something to do with Miss Jenkins's current situation," he asked carefully. "It does," Matthew said, "and I intend to do right by her and give her child a name and a home." The Reverend studied Matthew for a long moment, then smiled. "You are a good man, Matthew Quinn. Your mother would be proud of you." He turned to Nora. "And you, Miss Jenkins? You are entering into this marriage of your own free will?" "I am," Nora said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Yes, circumstances were pushing her toward this choice, but Matthew had given her an option. She could have refused him. She was choosing this path. "Very well then," Reverend Marsh said. "Let me fetch my wife to serve as a witness, and we will proceed." Mrs. Marsh, a plump woman with kind eyes, was summoned from the rectory. If she was surprised by the unusual circumstances, she hid it well, simply taking her place beside her husband with a warm smile for both Nora and Matthew. They stood before the simple wooden altar, sunlight streaming through the plain glass windows. It was nothing like the wedding Nora had dreamed of as a girl. There were no flowers, no music, no guests filling the pews. Her dress was dusty from travel, and she had no ring to give Matthew, nor he her. But as Reverend Marsh began to speak the ancient words of the marriage ceremony, Nora felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony," the Reverend intoned. Nora glanced up at Matthew and found him looking down at her with an expression of such gentle solemnity that her heart gave an unexpected flutter. This man, this virtual stranger, was offering her salvation without asking for anything in return. The magnitude of his generosity overwhelmed her. The ceremony was brief and simple. When it came time for the vows, Matthew spoke his clearly and firmly, his deep voice filling the small church. "I, Matthew Thomas Quinn, take you, Nora Jane Jenkins, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do us part." Then it was Nora's turn. Her voice trembled as she repeated the words, but she did not falter. "I, Nora Jane Jenkins, take you, Matthew Thomas Quinn, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. By the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada and by God Almighty, I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Marsh declared. "Matthew, you may kiss your bride." Matthew hesitated, clearly uncertain, but then he leaned down and pressed a gentle, chaste kiss to Nora's lips. It lasted only a second, but Nora felt warmth bloom in her chest where only cold shame had resided moments before. They signed the marriage certificate, Mrs. Marsh and the Reverend adding their signatures as witnesses. When it was done, Nora stared down at the document that declared her to be Mrs. Matthew Quinn. It seemed impossible that her entire life had changed so drastically in the space of an hour. Matthew paid the Reverend for his services, then offered Nora his arm. "Come on, wife," he said with a small smile. "Let me show you your new home." They walked back through town together, and this time when people stared, Matthew stared right back with a challenge in his eyes that dared anyone to say a word against his new bride. No one did. They collected Matthew's horse from where he had left it hitched outside the saloon, and he helped Nora up into the saddle before swinging up behind her. Her carpetbag was secured behind the saddle, and then they were riding out of Silver Peak toward the open range. The Double R Ranch lay to the northwest of town, sprawling across thousands of acres of scrubland and sage. Matthew's property, he explained as they rode, was on the eastern edge of the ranch's territory. He had purchased it from the ranch owner, Richard Reynolds, who had been Matthew's employer for the past 5 years. "Mr. Reynolds is a fair man," Matthew told her as they followed a narrow trail through the desert landscape. "When I told him I wanted to start building my own place, he sold me the land at a good price and gave me permission to work on the house during my time off." They crested a low rise, and Nora saw it. A small house standing alone against the vast Nevada sky. It was a simple structure, built of wood that had already weathered to a soft gray. The roof was complete, and she could see a stone chimney rising from one side. There were no windows yet, just openings covered with canvas, and the front door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. But it was sturdy and real, a home in the making. "It is not much yet," Matthew said, and she could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "But the walls are solid and the roof does not leak. I have been working on the inside, putting in floors and such. There is a good well about 50 yards behind the house, and the land is suitable for running a few head of cattle eventually." "It is wonderful," Nora said softly, and meant it. After the morning she had endured, this rough little house looked like paradise. Matthew reined in the horse in front of the house and dismounted, then reached up to help Nora down. His hand spanned her waist easily, and he lifted her as though she weighed nothing. Once her feet were on the ground, he did not immediately release her, and they stood there for a moment, close enough that Nora could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "Welcome home, Nora Quinn," he said quietly. Hearing her new name spoken aloud sent a shiver through her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." Matthew finally released her and grabbed her carpet bag from the horse. "Come on inside, and I will show you what I've done so far." The interior of the house was dim and cooler than outside. As Nora's eyes adjusted, she could see that Matthew had indeed made significant progress. The main room was spacious, with rough-hewn wooden floors and walls of bare lumber. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and there was a basic kitchen area with a cast-iron stove in one corner. A sturdy table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and she could see a bed frame in the smaller room that branched off from the main space. "I know it is rough," Matthew said, setting her bag down carefully. "But I have curtains on order from the general store, and I was planning to build more furniture over the winter. There is a barn out back that is almost finished too. I have my horse and a milk cow." "You have done all this yourself?" Nora asked, looking around with new appreciation. The amount of work represented here was staggering. "Most of it," Matthew admitted. "Some of the other cowboys from the ranch helped with the heavy timber work. Cowboys stick together out here." He walked to the kitchen area and pulled back a cloth covering to reveal a loaf of bread, some cheese, and a jar of preserves. "I do not have much in the way of food at the moment, but we can go into town tomorrow to stock up properly." The mention of food made Nora realize she had not eaten since the night before. Her stomach growled audibly, and she felt her face heat with embarrassment. Matthew smiled. "Let me make you something to eat. You must be starving." He insisted that she sit at the table while he prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and coffee. Nora watched him move around the small kitchen with easy competence, and something about the domesticity of the scene made her throat tighten with emotion. This man had married her hours ago, and now he was making her lunch in their home. It all felt surreal. When he set the plate in front of her, Nora realized she was ravenous. She ate quickly, barely tasting the food, while Matthew sat across from her with his own plate. "I should probably explain my situation," Matthew said after a while. "So you know what to expect. I work for the R 6 days a week, usually from dawn until dusk. The pay is decent, and Mr. Reynolds is generous with his hands. I have Sundays off, and I have been using that time to work on the house. I have saved up a fair amount of money over the years with the goal of eventually running my own small ranch. This place is the start of that dream." "It sounds like you have worked very hard here," Nora said. Matthew shrugged. "I came west when I was 16 with nothing but the clothes on my back. I did not have much choice but to work hard if I wanted to survive." He paused, his expression growing distant. "My parents died of fever back in Missouri. I had no other family, so I headed out here to make my own way." "I am sorry," Nora said softly, "about your parents." "It was a long time ago," Matthew said, though she could hear the old grief still lingering in his voice. "But it taught me that family is not always the people you are born to. Sometimes it is the people you choose or who choose you." The pointed relevance of his words to her own situation was not lost on Nora. "Is that why you helped me today?" she asked. "Because you know what it is like to be alone?" Matthew met her eyes across the table. "Partly," he admitted, "but also because it was the right thing to do. You do not deserve to be cast out for making one mistake. Nora, And that baby you are carrying deserves a chance at a good life. Nora placed a hand on her stomach instinctively. I am only about 2 months along, she said quietly. I probably will not start showing for another month or so. We have time then, Matthew said. Time for people to get used to the idea of us being married before it becomes obvious about the baby. With any luck, folks will assume it is mine. The casual way he said it, as though claiming another man's child as his own was no great matter, left Nora momentarily speechless. You would do that? She asked. Let people think the baby is yours? Of course, Matthew said firmly. Once we are married, any child you bear is legally mine anyway. And as far as I am concerned, this baby will be mine in every way that matters. I will raise it as my own, Nora. You have my word on that. The tears came then, hot and fast, spilling down Nora's cheeks before she could stop them. All the fear and grief and shame of the past week came pouring out in great wrenching sobs. Matthew was around the table in an instant, pulling her up from her chair and into his arms. He held her while she cried, one hand rubbing soothing circles on her back, murmuring soft words of comfort. Let it out, he said gently. You have been through hell, Nora. It is all right to cry. So she did, soaking the front of his shirt with her tears, clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had tilted off its axis. And through it all, Matthew simply held her, steady and strong, asking nothing in return. When the storm finally passed and Nora's sobs subsided into hiccups, she pulled back slightly, mortified by her loss of control. I am so sorry, she said, wiping at her face with her hands. I did not mean to fall apart like that. Do not apologize, Matthew said firmly. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and gently dabbed at her tear-stained cheeks. You have every right to your feelings. This has been an impossible day for you. It has been the worst day and the best day all at once, Nora said shakily. I lost my family this morning, but I gained a husband who is kinder to me than I ever deserved. You deserve kindness, Nora, Matthew said, his blue eyes intense. Never doubt that. They stood there in the middle of the small house, and Nora became acutely aware of how close they were, of the warmth of his body and the strength in his arms that still encircled her loosely. This was her husband now. This man had every legal right to her, and yet she did not feel afraid. She felt safe. I should probably let you rest, Matthew said, seeming to read her thoughts. You have been through a lot today. The bed is in the other room. It is the only bed I have at the moment, so it is yours. I will sleep out here on the floor. I cannot take your bed, Nora protested. This is your house. It is our house now, Matthew corrected gently, and you are carrying a child. You need proper rest. I will be fine on the floor. I have slept in far worse places, believe me. Before Nora could argue further, Matthew was already pulling blankets from a chest in the corner and making himself a pallet near the fireplace. It was clear that the discussion was closed. There is a basin and pitcher in the bedroom if you want to wash up, Matthew said. And please, make yourself at home. This is your place now, Nora. You do not need to ask permission for anything. Nora nodded, suddenly exhausted down to her bones. The emotional upheaval of the day was catching up with her, and the thought of lying down was almost unbearably appealing. She retrieved her carpet bag and went into the small bedroom. The bed was a simple affair, but the mattress looked comfortable, and the quilts piled on it were clean and well made. There was indeed a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and someone, Matthew presumably, had even put a small mirror on the wall above it. Nora poured water into the basin and washed her face and hands, the cool liquid soothing against her heated skin. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her gray eyes looked enormous in her pale face, and her brown hair was coming loose from its pins. She looked like someone who had been through a battle, and in a way she supposed she had been. She undid her hair completely, running her fingers through the long waves to work out the tangles. Then she unlaced her tight traveling dress and changed into her nightgown, sighing with relief as the constricting garments came off. Her body was already changing, her breasts tender and fuller than usual, though her belly still showed no sign of the life within. She lay down on the bed, and the softness of the mattress after the tension of the day made her want to weep again. Through the open doorway, she could hear Matthew moving around in the main room, the sound of his boots on the wooden floor, the creak of the chair as he sat down. Her husband. The word still felt strange in her mind. Despite her exhaustion, sleep did not come immediately. Her mind spun with everything that had happened. This morning she had been Nora Jenkins, disgraced daughter with no future and no hope. Now she was Nora Quinn, married woman, with a home and a husband who had promised to care for her and her child. It was too much to process, too overwhelming to fully comprehend. And yet beneath the shock and the grief and the fear, there was something else, a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. Matthew Quinn had given her a second chance when she had thought her life was over. She did not know what the future held, did not know if she could ever truly be a proper wife to him, but she was grateful beyond words that she would have the chance to try. Eventually, exhaustion won out over her racing thoughts, and Nora drifted into an uneasy sleep. She woke some hours later to the sound of rain pattering against the canvas covering the window openings. The room had grown darker, late afternoon sliding toward evening, and for a moment Nora was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory returned in a rush, and she sat up quickly, her heart pounding. From the main room she heard Matthew's voice. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Nora called back, her voice rough from sleep. "I'm fine. I just forgot where I was for a moment." She rose from the bed, running her fingers through her tangled hair in a futile attempt to make herself presentable. Then she pulled on her wrapper and ventured out into the main room. Matthew was sitting at the table, working on something with his hands. When she appeared, he looked up and smiled. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Nora admitted. She moved closer and saw that he was carving something from a piece of wood, thin curls of pale shavings littering the table around him. "I thought I would start on some curtain rods," Matthew explained, holding up the length of wood. "Since we will be getting curtains soon, might as well have something to hang them on." The domesticity of it, the implication of a shared future where curtains mattered, made Nora's chest feel tight. "That is very practical," she managed. Matthew set down his knife and stood. "Are you hungry? I was thinking I could make some supper. I have some beans and salt pork, and there is still bread left." "Let me do it," Nora said quickly. "Please, I need to start earning my keep here." "You do not need to earn anything," Matthew said, but he stepped aside and let her take over the small kitchen area. Nora found comfort in the familiar tasks of cooking. She soaked the beans that Matthew had already prepared earlier, fried up the salt pork in a pan, and set coffee to boil on the stove. As she worked, Matthew returned to his carving, the two of them sharing a companionable silence that felt surprisingly natural. When the simple meal was ready, they sat together at the table as rain continued to drum steadily on the roof. Outside, the desert was drinking in the unexpected moisture, and Nora could smell the dusty mineral scent of rain on dry earth through the canvas-covered windows. "Tell me about yourself," Matthew said as they ate. "I want to know more about my wife." The word still sent a little jolt through Nora every time she heard it. "There's not much to tell," she said. "I'm 19 years old. I am the oldest of 4 daughters. I helped my mother run our household and taught Sunday school at the church. I like to sing and sew and read when I can get my hands on books." She paused, her throat tightening. "At least, that is who I used to be. I do not know who I am now." "You are still all those things," Matthew said gently. "What happened to you does not change the fundamental person you are, Nora." "My father would disagree," she said bitterly. "In his eyes, I am nothing but a whore who brought shame on the family name." Matthew's hand came down on the table with a sharp crack that made Nora jump. "Your father is wrong," he said, his voice hard. "And I do not ever want to hear you use that word about yourself again. Do you understand me?" Nora stared at him, startled by the intensity of his reaction. I did not mean to upset you." "I am not upset with you," Matthew said, visibly working to control his temper. "I am angry at the people who made you believe you deserve to be treated like something shameful. You made a mistake, Nora. You trusted someone who turned out to be unworthy of that trust. That does not make you a bad person." "I should have known better," Nora whispered. "Robert was always so charming, so full of pretty words. He said he loved me, that we would be married as soon as he made his fortune in the silver mines. I believed him. When he asked me to prove my love for him, I thought we would be married soon anyway, so what did it matter? I was such a fool." "He was the fool," Matthew said firmly. "Any man who would abandon you the way he did is not worthy to shine your shoes. Where is he now?" "I do not know," Nora said. "He left town the day after I told him about the baby. Someone said they saw him heading toward California." "Good riddance," Matthew muttered. "The baby is better off without a father like that." They finished their meal in silence, and then Nora insisted on cleaning up while Matthew tended to his horse and the cow in the barn out back. By the time he returned smelling of hay and rain, the kitchen area was spotless, and Nora had found a deck of cards in one of the cupboards. "Do you play cards?" she asked. "Some," Matthew said. "What did you have in mind?" They spent the evening playing simple games, and Nora was surprised to find herself laughing at Matthew's dry humor and the ridiculous luck she had with the cards. For a few hours she was able to forget the disaster her life had become and simply exist in this moment, in this small house, with this kind man who asked nothing of her but her company. As the night grew late and they prepared for bed, the question that had been hovering in Nora's mind all day finally surfaced. They were married now. Matthew had every right to claim his husbandly privileges, and the law would back him if he chose to do so. But when she emerged from the bedroom in her nightgown, she found him already settled on his pallet by the fireplace, still fully clothed except for his boots. He looked up as she hesitated in the doorway. "Sleep well, Nora," he said simply. "I will see you in the morning." "Matthew," she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the question. He seemed to understand anyway. "I meant what I said earlier," he told her quietly. "I'm not expecting anything from you beyond what you are willing to give. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, you let me know. Until then, I am content to be your husband in name and nothing more." The relief that washed through Nora was profound. "Thank you," she whispered. "No thanks necessary," Matthew said. "Now go get some rest. Tomorrow we will go into town and get the supplies we need to turn this house into a proper home." Nora returned to the bedroom, and this time when she lay down, sleep came quickly and deeply. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the rain having washed the air clean. Nora woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and for a moment she was confused before remembering where she was. She dressed quickly in a simple calico dress and braided her hair, then went to find Matthew already up and making breakfast. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "I hope I did not wake you." "Not at all," Nora assured him. "Can I help?" Together they prepared a hearty breakfast of bacon, eggs from the neighbor's chickens that Matthew said he occasionally traded for, and more of the bread from yesterday. As they ate, Matthew laid out his plan for the day. "I need to go to the ranch and let Mr. Reynolds know about our marriage," he said. "He will understand, but I need to tell him in person. After that, we can go into town and stock up on supplies. I thought we could get fabric, too, if you want to make curtains and such. Make the place feel more like home." "I would like that," Nora said, "though I worry about facing the town so soon. People will talk." "Let them talk," Matthew said with a shrug. "We have done nothing wrong. We are married, legally, and in the eyes of God. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." His protective attitude warmed something inside Nora's chest. She had not expected to feel anything but gratitude toward Matthew, but she was discovering that she genuinely liked him. He was kind without being weak, strong without being domineering. She could do far worse for a husband, circumstances aside. They rode together to the Double R Ranch, Nora seated in front of Matthew on his horse, his arm secure around her waist. The ranch headquarters was an impressive spread with a large main house, multiple barns and outbuildings, and corrals full of horses and cattle. Cowboys moved about their morning tasks, and several of them called out greetings to Matthew as they rode past. Richard Reynolds, the ranch owner, was a man in his 50s with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades spent in the sun and wind. He came out onto the porch of the main house when Matthew hailed him, his expression curious. "Quinn," he said in greeting, "did not expect to see you today. Thought you were taking the day off." Then his eyes fell on Nora and his eyebrows rose. "And who might this be?" "Mr. Reynolds, this is my wife, Nora," Matthew said, helping her dismount before swinging down himself. "We were married yesterday." Reynolds's eyes widened in surprise, but he recovered quickly, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, now that is news. Congratulations to you both." He came down the porch steps and offered Nora his hand. "Mrs. Quinn, welcome to the Double R." "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," Nora said, shaking his hand. Reynolds looked between them, clearly wondering about the suddenness of the marriage, but too polite to ask directly. "I assume this means you will be needing some time to settle in?" "Just today and tomorrow, if you can spare me," Matthew said. "I want to get the house properly stocked and ready. I will be back to work on Monday." "Take the time you need," Reynolds said generously. "And Quinn, I'm glad to see you settling down. You are a good man and you deserve some happiness." They chatted for a few more minutes, and then Matthew and Nora rode on towards Silver Peak. As they approached the town, Nora felt her anxiety returning. The last time she had been here, she had been standing alone on the street with all her worldly possessions in a carpet bag, rejected and abandoned. Now she was returning as a married woman. But would that be enough to redeem her in the eyes of the townspeople? Matthew seemed to sense her nervousness. "Hold your head high," he murmured in her ear. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." They went first to the general store, where the proprietor, Mr. Nelson, greeted them with obvious curiosity. "Matthew Quinn," he said, "and Miss Jenkins, or should I say Mrs. Quinn now? I heard you two got married yesterday." "Word travels fast," Matthew said dryly. "Yes, Nora is my wife. We need to stock up on supplies." For the next hour they moved through the store, selecting flour, sugar, coffee, beans, rice, salt, preserves, and a dozen other necessities. Nora chose fabric for curtains, good sturdy cotton in a cheerful pattern, as well as thread and needles. Matthew insisted on buying her a new dress length as well, a pretty blue calico that brought out her eyes. As they shopped, Nora became aware of other customers in the store watching them and whispering. She caught snatches of conversation, some of it sympathetic, much of it judgmental. But Matthew's presence beside her, solid and unwavering, gave her the strength to ignore the whispers and focus on the task at hand. They were loading their purchases into the small wagon Matthew had borrowed from the ranch when a familiar voice called out Nora's name. She turned to see her younger sister Sarah running toward her. "Nora!" Sarah cried, throwing her arms around Nora's waist. "I was so worried about you. Are you all right?" Nora hugged her sister tightly, tears pricking her eyes. "I am fine, Sarah, I promise." Sarah pulled back, her young face troubled. "Papa said we are not supposed to talk to you anymore, but I do not care what he says. You are my sister and I love you." "I love you too," Nora said, her voice breaking. "Sarah Jenkins, get away from her this instant." They all turned to see Thomas Jenkins striding toward them, his face dark with fury. He grabbed Sarah's arm and yanked her away from Nora with enough force to make the girl cry out. "I told you she is not your sister anymore," Thomas snarled at Sarah. Then he turned his burning gaze on Nora. "And I told you that you are no daughter of mine. Stay away from my family." "She is your daughter, and she is your family," Matthew said, stepping forward. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "And she is my wife now. You will treat her with respect." Thomas's lip curled. "So she found someone foolish enough to take damaged goods. Congratulations, Quinn. You have married yourself a whore." Matthew's fist connected with Thomas's jaw before Nora could even register that he had moved. The older man staggered backward, releasing Sarah's arm, and landed hard on the ground. Several townspeople who had been watching the confrontation gasped, and Sarah screamed. Matthew stood over Thomas, his hands clenched into fists, his chest heaving. "I warned you about using that word," he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Nora is a good woman, and she deserves better than a father who would turn his back on her when she needed him most. If I ever hear you speak about her like that again, what I just did will seem like a friendly greeting. Do you understand me?" Thomas stared up at Matthew, blood trickling from his split lip, shock and anger warring in his expression. But something in Matthew's eyes must have convinced him not to push the matter further, because he simply nodded once, curtly. Matthew reached down and helped the older man to his feet, then turned back to Nora and Sarah. "Come on, Nora, let us go home." Nora bent and kissed Sarah's forehead quickly. "Be good, sweetheart. I love you." Then she allowed Matthew to help her up into the wagon. As they drove away, she looked back to see Sarah standing in the street, tears streaming down her face, while Thomas stalked away in the opposite direction. "I am sorry," Matthew said quietly as they left the town behind. "I should not have hit him, but I could not let him speak about you that way." "Do not apologize," Nora said. She reached over and took his hand, which was still slightly swollen from the punch. "No one has ever defended me like that before. Thank you." Matthew squeezed her hand gently. "You are my wife now, Nora. I will always defend you." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking along the dusty road. Finally, Nora said, "I hope Sarah does not get in trouble for speaking to me." "Your sister loves you," Matthew said. "That is plain to see. And love like that is not easily crushed, no matter what your father says or does. She will be fine." Nora hoped he was right. The thought of her younger sister suffering because of her made her heart ache. But there was nothing she could do about it now. She had made her choice, and she would have to live with the consequences. When they arrived back at the house, they spent the rest of the afternoon unloading supplies and putting them away. Matthew had built shelves in the kitchen area, and Nora arranged their goods on them with a growing sense of satisfaction. This was her home now, her kitchen. She could put things where she wanted them, could organize the space to suit her needs. It was a small thing, but after a lifetime of living under her mother's rules, it felt revolutionary. That evening, as they sat together after supper, Nora pulled out the fabric she had purchased and began measuring it for curtains. Matthew watched her work, his eyes following the quick, sure movements of her hands. "You are good at that," he observed. "My mother taught me," Nora said. "She is an excellent seamstress. I suppose I inherited some of her skill." "Tell me more about your family," Matthew said. "Before all this happened, I mean. What were they like?" Nora's hands stilled on the fabric. It was painful to talk about, but part of her also wanted to remember the good times before everything had gone so wrong. "My father was a farmer," she said slowly. "We had a small place outside town where we grew vegetables and kept chickens. He worked hard, and he provided well for us. He used to be kind, or at least I thought he was. I suppose I never really knew what he would do when faced with something like this." "And your mother?" Matthew prompted gently. "My mother is a good woman, but she has always deferred to my father in all things. Whatever he says is law in our household. I used to think that was just how marriage worked, how it was supposed to be." She looked up at Matthew. "But you are not like that. You ask my opinion, you treat me like an equal." "That is how I believe marriage should be," Matthew said. "A partnership, not a dictatorship." Nora resumed her sewing, considering his words. "Tell me about your parents," she said. "What were they like?" Matthew's expression grew distant. "They were good people, simple folks, but honest and hard-working. My father was a blacksmith, and my mother took in laundry and mending to help make ends meet. They loved each other deeply, and they loved me. When the fever took them, it was fast. They were both gone within a week." "That must have been terrible," Nora said softly. "It was the hardest thing I have ever been through," Matthew admitted. "I was 16 and completely alone in the world. For a while, I did not think I would survive it, but I did, and I came out here, and I built a life for myself. It taught me that you can survive anything if you keep putting one foot in front of the other." "Is that what I am doing?" Nora asks. "Surviving?" "Right now, yes," Matthew said. "But eventually I hope you will do more than just survive. I hope you will learn to truly live again." His words stayed with Nora long after they had gone to bed that night, each in their separate spaces. She lay in the darkness of the small bedroom, one hand resting on her still flat stomach, and thought about what it meant to truly live. Right now she felt like she was treading water, just trying to keep her head above the surface. But Matthew was right. Eventually she would need to do more than just survive. She would need to build a real life here, a real marriage for herself and for her child. The days began to settle into a rhythm. Matthew left early each morning for the ranch and returned at dusk, tired but always ready with a smile for Nora. She spent her days working on the house, sewing curtains and cushions, organizing their small domain, and learning to cook on the temperamental cast iron stove. It was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way that her previous life had never been. Here she was not just one of many daughters helping with chores. Here she was building something of her own. As the weeks passed, Nora found herself growing more comfortable around Matthew. He was unfailingly kind and patient, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. They talked every evening over supper, sharing stories of their days, discussing their plans for the future. Slowly, cautiously, Nora began to let down her guard. She learned that Matthew had a dry sense of humor that could make her laugh even on difficult days. She learned that he was surprisingly well read for a cowboy, having educated himself through borrowed books over the years. She learned that he sang while he worked, old folk songs from his childhood in Missouri, and that his voice was pleasant and tuneful. And she learned that when he looked at her, there was something in his eyes that made her heart beat a little faster. One evening in late September, about a month after their marriage, Nora was putting the finishing touches on the last set of curtains when Matthew came home carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "What is that?" Nora asked curiously. "A gift," Matthew said, looking almost shy. "For you." He handed her the package, and Nora unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a beautiful shawl, soft wool in a deep green color that reminded her of pine forests. It was far nicer than anything she had owned in a long time. "Matthew," she breathed, "this is too much. You should not have spent money on something like this." "I wanted to," Matthew said. "The nights are getting colder, and I wanted you to have something warm, and the color matches your eyes." Nora looked up at him, startled. She had gray eyes, not green, and was about to correct him when she realized he was teasing her. A smile tugged at her lips despite herself. "My eyes are gray, you fool." "Are they?" Matthew said innocently. "I could have sworn they were green." Nora laughed, and the sound surprised her. She could not remember the last time she had genuinely laughed. But here, with this man who had saved her, who asked nothing of her but her company, laughter came easily. She stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek impulsively. "Thank you. It is beautiful, and I love it." Matthew's hand came up to touch the spot where her lips had been, and something in his expression made Nora's breath catch. They stood there for a moment, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and Nora realized with sudden clarity that she wanted him to kiss her. Properly this time, not the chaste peck they had shared at their wedding. But Matthew stepped back, breaking the moment. "I should wash up for supper," he said, his voice slightly rough. Nora nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. She was not sure what was happening between them, this slow, building tension that seemed to grow a little stronger every day. She only knew that when she looked at Matthew now, she no longer saw just the kind stranger who had rescued her. She saw a man who made her feel safe, who made her laugh, who looked at her like she was something precious. She was beginning to fall in love with her husband. The realization came to her fully one morning in early October as she stood at the window watching Matthew work in the corral with one of the horses. He moved with easy grace, his body strong and capable, his voice low and soothing as he calmed the skittish animal. And Nora's heart swelled with an emotion that was far more than gratitude. She loved him. Somewhere in the past weeks, amid the quiet evenings and shared meals and gentle conversations, she had fallen in love with Matthew Quinn. The knowledge terrified her. She had loved before, or thought she had, and it had ended in betrayal and heartbreak. How could she trust her own feelings? How could she be sure that what she felt for Matthew was real and not just gratitude for his kindness? But as she watched him, as she thought about the man he had shown himself to be day after day, Nora knew that this was different. Robert had been all flash and charm and empty promises. Matthew was steady and true, his actions backing up his words every single time. If she could not trust a man like that, then she could not trust anyone. That evening after supper, Nora made a decision. She had been sleeping alone in the bedroom for weeks now while Matthew made do with the hard floor. It was time to change that. "Matthew," she said as he prepared his pallet for the night, "I would like you to sleep in the bed tonight." He looked up, surprise clear on his face. "Nora, I am fine here. You need your rest, especially now that—" He trailed off, but they both knew what he meant. Her body was changing, her belly just beginning to show the slightest curve. The baby was growing. "I know you are fine," Nora said, her heart pounding, "but I am not. I do not want to sleep alone anymore, Matthew. I want my husband beside me." The air between them seemed to crackle with sudden tension. Matthew rose slowly to his feet, his blue eyes searching hers. "Nora, are you sure? I do not want you to feel obligated." "I am not doing this out of obligation," Nora said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I am doing this because I want to, because you are my husband, and I—" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I have feelings for you, Matthew, real feelings." For a moment, Matthew simply stared at her, as though he could not quite believe what he was hearing. Then, in 2 long strides, he crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "I have been waiting to hear you say something like that," he murmured against her hair. "I have had feelings for you from the beginning, Nora. I married you because it was the right thing to do, yes, but also because I could not bear the thought of you facing the world alone, because I wanted you to be mine." Nora pulled back just enough to look up at him. "Kiss me," she whispered. "Really kiss me this time." Matthew cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking gently across her cheekbones. Then he lowered his head and claimed her lips with his own. It was nothing like the innocent kiss they had shared at their wedding. This kiss was deep and searching, full of weeks of pent-up longing and desire. Nora melted into it, her arms wrapping around Matthew's neck, her body pressing against his. She felt the heat of him, the solid strength of his muscles, and something inside her ignited. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" he asked. "Once we cross this line, Nora, there is no going back. You will be my wife in every sense of the word." "I am certain," Nora said. "I want this, Matthew. I want you." He swept her up into his arms, then carrying her into the bedroom with a tenderness that made her heart ache. As he laid her on the bed and followed her down, Nora felt a moment of nervousness. Her only previous experience had been fumbling and awkward, more disappointing than pleasurable. But Matthew was patient, his hands gentle as he helped her out of her clothing, his lips trailing kisses across every inch of skin he revealed. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, and the reverence in his voice made Nora believe him. When they finally came together, it was nothing like what Nora had experienced before. Matthew took his time, making sure she was ready, making sure she felt pleasure as well as he did. And when it was over, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Nora felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "Did I hurt you?" Matthew asked immediately, concern filling his voice. "No," Nora assured him, turning in his arms so she could see his face in the moonlight filtering through the window. "You did not hurt me at all. These are happy tears. I never knew it could be like that, Matthew. I never knew it could feel so right." He kissed her forehead softly. "With the right person, it is always like that, and you are the right person for me, Nora. I love you." The words, spoken so simply and sincerely, broke open something inside Nora's chest. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I would ever be able to love again after what Robert did to me, but you have shown me what real love looks like. You have given me everything when I had nothing. I love you, Matthew Quinn, with all my heart." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time since her world had fallen apart, Nora felt truly at peace. The next few months passed in a haze of happiness that Nora had never imagined possible. As autumn gave way to winter, the love between her and Matthew deepened and grew stronger. They were truly husband and wife now in every sense, partners building a life together. The baby grew too, Nora's belly swelling with the undeniable evidence of new life. By December, there was no hiding her condition, and when they went into town for supplies, Nora could feel the eyes on her, could hear the whispers. Some people counted on their fingers, trying to figure out if the baby could possibly be Matthew's based on their wedding date. But Matthew always stood beside her, his hand at the small of her back, his presence a clear message that he did not care what anyone thought. Richard Reynolds proved to be a good friend as well. When he learned of Nora's condition, he and his wife, Margaret, made a point of inviting the young couple to dinner at the ranch. Margaret, a kind woman in her 40s, took Nora under her wing, offering advice about pregnancy and childbirth and insisting that Nora visit whenever she needed company. "Do not let the small-minded people in this town make you feel ashamed," Margaret told her one afternoon as they sat in the ranch house parlor sipping tea. "You have a good husband who loves you, and you are bringing a child into the world. That is something to celebrate, not hide." Her words meant more to Nora than the older woman could know. Having a female friend, someone who did not judge her, made the isolation she felt from her own family a little easier to bear. Christmas came, and Matthew surprised Nora by cutting down a small pine tree and setting it up in their main room. They decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments that Nora made, and on Christmas morning Matthew gave her a beautiful wooden cradle he had been secretly building in the barn. "For the baby," he said, looking almost embarrassed. "I know it is not fancy, but I wanted our child to have a proper place to sleep." Nora ran her hands over the smooth wood, admiring the careful craftsmanship. The cradle was simple but sturdy, built with love by the man who had become not just her husband but her best friend and the love of her life. "It is perfect," she said, tears gathering in her eyes. Pregnancy had made her even more emotional than usual, and she cried at the smallest things these days. "Our baby is so lucky to have you as a father, Matthew." "I am the lucky one," Matthew said, pulling her into his arms, as much as her protruding belly would allow. "I have you, and we are about to have a baby. I have everything I ever wanted." They spent a quiet Christmas together, just the two of them, and Nora found she did not miss the large family gatherings she had grown up with. This was better, more intimate. This was her family now. In January, as Nora entered her 8th month of pregnancy, she received an unexpected visitor. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Shading her eyes against the winter sun, she was shocked to see her sister Sarah driving their family's wagon. "Sarah!" Nora hurried forward as quickly as her bulk would allow. "What are you doing here? Does Papa know you came?" Sarah shook her head, her young face troubled. "He and Mama went to visit Aunt Helen in Carson City. They will be gone for 3 days. I had to see you, Nora. I have missed you so much." The two sisters embraced, and Nora felt tears streaming down her face. "I have missed you too, sweetheart, so much." They went inside and Nora made tea while Sarah looked around the small house with wide eyes. "You have made it so nice," Sarah said admiringly. "It feels like a real home." "It is a real home," Nora said. "The first real home I have ever had that is truly mine." They talked for hours, Sarah filling Nora in on all the family news, Their younger sisters, Emma and Lucy, missed Nora terribly. Their mother cried sometimes when she thought no one was watching, and their father, Sarah reported, had become harder and more bitter since Nora had left. "I think he regrets what he did," Sarah said quietly, "but he's too proud to admit it." "I doubt that," Nora said, though part of her wanted desperately to believe it. "Papa made his feelings about me very clear." Before Sarah left, she hugged Nora tightly. "I love you, big sister. And I'm going to be an aunt soon. I cannot wait to meet the baby." "I love you too," Nora said, "and you are welcome here anytime, Sarah. This is your home too, whenever you need it." After Sarah left, Nora felt both happy and melancholy. Seeing her sister had reminded her of everything she had lost, but it had also shown her that not all the connections to her old life were severed. Sarah still loved her. That had to count for something. That evening, when Matthew came home, Nora told him about Sarah's visit. He listened quietly, then pulled her close. "Your sister loves you," he said, "and someday maybe the rest of your family will come around too. But even if they do not, you have me and you have our baby. That is enough." "You are right," Nora agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "That is more than enough." As February arrived and Nora's due date approached, she found herself growing anxious. Margaret Reynolds had arranged for the town midwife, Mrs. Hutchinson, to attend the birth, but the thought of going through labor terrified Nora. She had heard so many stories of women who died in childbirth, of babies who did not survive. What if something went wrong? What if she left Matthew alone after he had risked so much to save her? Matthew seemed to sense her fears. "You are strong, Nora," he told her one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her swollen belly. "You're going to get through this just fine, and we are going to have a beautiful, healthy baby." "How can you be so sure?" Nora asked. "Because I have faith," Matthew said simply. "Faith in you, faith in us, faith that we are meant to be a family." His certainty calmed her, and Nora found herself able to breathe a little easier. The baby came on a cold February night, 2 weeks before Nora's due date. The pains had started that afternoon while Matthew was at work, and by the time he returned home at dusk, Nora was gripping the edge of the table, breathing through the contractions. "The baby is coming," she gasped. "You need to get Mrs. Hutchinson." Matthew went pale, but sprang into action. He settled Nora into bed, then rode hard for town to fetch the midwife. By the time they returned an hour later, Nora's pains were coming hard and fast. Mrs. Hutchinson, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, took over with brisk efficiency. She shooed Matthew out of the bedroom, ignoring his protests, and set about helping Nora through her labor. The next several hours were a blur of pain and effort. Nora screamed and cried and cursed, certain she was going to die. But through it all, she could hear Matthew's voice from the other room talking to her through the door, encouraging her, telling her he loved her. And then, just as dawn was breaking on February 15th, 1883, a baby's cry filled the small house. "It is a boy," Mrs. Hutchinson announced, wrapping the squalling infant in a clean blanket. "A strong, healthy boy." Nora reached for her son with trembling arms, and the moment she held him, she fell completely in love. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air as he cried. "Matthew," she called out, her voice hoarse, "come meet your son." The door burst open, and Matthew rushed in, his face haggard from a night of worry. But when he saw Nora and the baby, his entire expression transformed into one of wonder and joy. "A son," he breathed, kneeling beside the bed. "We have a son." He reached out tentatively, and Nora placed the baby in his arms. Matthew held the infant with a gentleness that made her heart swell as she watched her husband cradle their child. Tears of happiness streamed down Nora's face. "What should we name him?" Matthew asked, unable to take his eyes off the baby. Nora thought for a moment. Thomas, she said quietly, after my father. Despite everything, he gave me life, and that led me to you. And Michael for a middle name, after your father. Thomas Michael Quinn. Matthew's eyes were suspiciously bright as he looked up at her. That is perfect. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, son. Mrs. Hutchinson stayed for a few more hours to make sure both Nora and the baby were doing well, then left with instructions for care and a promise to check in the next day. Margaret Reynolds arrived later that morning with food and offers to help, and the small house was filled with the sounds of celebration. Over the next few weeks, as Nora recovered from childbirth and learned to care for her newborn son, she felt as though her life had finally, truly begun. Yes, Thomas was not Matthew's biological child, but watching them together, no one would ever know it. Matthew was a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk with the baby when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, cooing nonsense words that made Thomas's little face scrunch up adorably. He is perfect, Matthew said one evening as he rocked their son to sleep. Absolutely perfect. He is, Nora agreed, watching them from the doorway. We made something beautiful, you and I. Not just Thomas, but this life, this family. We built it from nothing, from the ashes of my old life. Matthew looked up at her, his blue eyes full of love. We built it together. That is what marriage is supposed to be, Nora. Two people facing the world side by side, building something that neither of them could create alone. As spring arrived and the desert bloomed with unexpected color, life settled into a new rhythm. Thomas grew fat and healthy, his dark hair giving way to lighter brown with hints of auburn. Nora healed from childbirth and threw herself into caring for her family and home. Matthew continued working at the Double R, but he also began acquiring a few head of cattle of his own, the first steps toward making his dream of running his own ranch a reality. One warm April afternoon, as Nora was sitting on the porch with Thomas sleeping in her arms, she saw a wagon approaching. Her heart sank when she recognized it as her family's wagon, and she braced herself for another confrontation with her father. But when the wagon drew closer, she realized it was her mother driving, not her father. Elizabeth Jenkins pulled the wagon to a stop and sat for a moment, just staring at Nora and the baby. Then, slowly, she climbed down and approached the porch. "Mama," Nora said quietly, her arms tightening protectively around Thomas. "I heard you had a boy," Elizabeth said, her voice carefully neutral. "I wanted to see him." Nora hesitated, then stood and carried Thomas down the porch steps. She held him out slightly so her mother could see his face. Elizabeth's carefully controlled expression crumbled as she looked at her grandson. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, he is beautiful, Nora." "His name is Thomas Michael Quinn," Nora said. "Thomas, after Papa." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Can I hold him?" Nora handed over her son, watching carefully as her mother cradled the baby with the practiced ease of a woman who had raised 4 daughters. Elizabeth stared down at Thomas's sleeping face, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry for what we did to you, Nora. You are my daughter, my firstborn, and I let your father turn me away from you when you needed me most. I have regretted it every single day." The words Nora had longed to hear for months hit her like a physical blow. "Mama," she choked out. "Your father is a proud, stubborn man," Elizabeth continued, "and he was wrong. So wrong. But I was wrong too for not standing up to him, for choosing his approval over my own child. Can you ever forgive me?" Nora felt tears sliding down her own face. "Of course I forgive you, Mama. I have missed you so much." Mother and daughter embraced awkwardly around the baby, both of them crying. When they finally pulled apart, Elizabeth wiped her eyes with her handkerchief. "Tell me everything," she said. "Tell me about your life here, about your husband. I want to know it all." They sat on the porch, and Nora told her mother everything, about how Matthew had proposed marriage to save her from ruin, about how they had built a life together, about how she had fallen in love with him, about Thomas's birth and the joy of being a mother. Elizabeth listened to it all, nodding and smiling and crying some more. "You have been blessed," she said finally, "to find a man like Matthew Quinn, a man who would do what he did for you. That is rare, Nora. Hold on to him tight." "I will," Nora promised. "Your father does not know I am here," Elizabeth admitted. "He would be furious if he knew, but I do not care anymore. You are my daughter, and I want to be part of your life and Thomas's life. If that means going against your father, then so be it." "What about Sarah and Emma and Lucy?" Nora asked. "Where can they visit too?" "Of course," Elizabeth said. "In fact, I have been thinking, perhaps one day when Thomas is a little older, you could bring him to visit. Let your sisters meet their nephew properly. Your father will just have to deal with it." The idea of eventually being welcomed back into her family, even if her father never forgave her, made hope bloom in Nora's chest. She was not naive enough to think everything would be magically fixed, but this was a start. A bridge being rebuilt, one careful step at a time. Matthew came home that evening to find Nora radiant with happiness. When she told him about her mother's visit, he pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "I am so glad," he said. "You deserve to have your family back, Nora." "I already have a family," Nora said, smiling up at him. "You and Thomas are my family. My mother and sisters are just a bonus." As summer arrived, life continued to improve. Elizabeth visited regularly, sometimes bringing Sarah and the younger girls with her. Thomas grew and thrived, becoming a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone he met. The small ranch was prospering, with Matthew's cattle multiplying and the house becoming more finished and comfortable with each passing month. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Matthew turned to Nora with a serious expression. "I have been thinking," he said, "about expanding the house, adding another bedroom or two." "Why would we need more bedroom?" Nora asked, though she thought she might already know the answer. "Well," Matthew said, a smile tugging at his lips, "I was hoping that Thomas might not be an only child forever, and if we are going to have more children, we are going to need more space." Nora felt warmth bloom in her chest. "More children. I would like that. I would like that very much." "Good," Matthew said, pulling her close, "because I love being a father and I love our family. I want to make it bigger, if you are willing." "I am willing," Nora said, tilting her face up for a kiss. "I am willing to build any kind of life with you, Matthew Quinn. You saved me, and then you gave me everything I never knew I needed. I love you so much." "I love you too," Matthew murmured against her lips, "always." The years that followed were filled with joy and hard work in equal measure. True to their discussion, Nora and Matthew did have more children. A daughter arrived in 1884, whom they named Eleanor Rose. Then another son in 1886, whom they called James Henry. And finally, in 1888, twin girls they named Margaret Ann and Elizabeth Jane, after Margaret Reynolds and Nora's mother. The house was expanded twice to accommodate the growing family, and Matthew's small ranch grew into a successful operation. He hired a couple of hands to help with the work, and the Quinn name became respected throughout Silver Peak and the surrounding territory. Thomas Jenkins never did apologize to his daughter, but as the years passed and he grew older, he softened slightly. He never visited their ranch, but when Nora and Matthew brought the children to town for church or supplies, Thomas would nod stiffly in acknowledgement. It was not reconciliation, but it was no longer outright hostility either. Nora learned to be content with that. Her sisters remained close to her, especially Sarah, who married a local rancher in 1885 and settled nearby. The cousins grew up together, a rambunctious gang of children who filled both ranches with laughter and chaos. As Nora approached her 30th birthday in 1893, she sometimes found herself reflecting on how drastically her life had changed. She had 5 beautiful children, a husband who loved her deeply, and a home that she had built with her own hands and heart. The girl who had been cast out in disgrace had become a woman respected in her community, known for her kindness and her strength. One evening, As she and Matthew sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Nora leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Marrying me that day? Taking on another man's child as your own?" Matthew was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thomas is my son in every way that matters. And as for regret, never. Not for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nora Quinn. You and our children are my whole world." "You saved my life," Nora said softly. "That day on the street when I had nothing and nowhere to go. You saved me." "No," Matthew said, turning to look at her with those blue eyes she had come to know so well. "We saved each other. I was just a lonely cowboy with a dream. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to build something lasting. We saved each other, and we built this life together." As the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Nora knew he was right. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful. A family born not of blood alone, but of choice and love and unwavering commitment. Thomas, now 10 years old, came running up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. "Papa, can you teach me to rope tomorrow? I have been practicing like you showed me, and I think I am ready to try with a real calf." Matthew ruffled his son's hair affectionately. "Sure thing, son. We will work on it after morning chores." Eleanor, 9 years old, and every bit as headstrong as her mother, was right behind her brother. "What about me, Papa? I want to learn too." "Of course, Ellie," Matthew said with a grin. "I would never leave my best girl out." James, the 7-year-old with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quick smile, was attempting to catch fireflies with the 5-year-old twins toddling after him. The yard was full of light and laughter, of childhood and innocence and joy. Nora watched it all with a heart so full she thought it might burst. This was everything she had never dared to dream of during those dark days when her father had cast her out. This was redemption and second chances and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. That night, after the children were all tucked into bed and the house had grown quiet, Matthew and Nora lay together in their bedroom, the same bedroom where they had first truly become husband and wife, where they had learned what it meant to love and be loved in return. "I have been thinking about something," Matthew said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Nora's arm. "What is that?" Nora asked drowsily, content and comfortable in his embrace. "I want to make this ranch official. Give it a proper name, something that represents what we have built here." Nora considered this. "What did you have in mind?" "I was thinking Second Chance Ranch," Matthew said, "because that is what this place represents. A second chance at life, at love, at family, for both of us." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes. "That is perfect," she whispered. "Second Chance Ranch. Our second chance." They decided to have a small celebration to christen the ranch with its new name. Margaret and Richard Reynolds came, along with several of the other ranch families in the area. Elizabeth Jenkins attended with Nora's sisters, though Thomas Jenkins remained notably absent, but his absence could not dampen the joy of the day. As Nora stood on the porch of her home, looking out at the gathered friends and family, at her children playing in the yard, at the sign Matthew had carved that now hung over the gate reading Second Chance Ranch, she felt a sense of completion. This was her life now, the life she had chosen, the life she had built from the ashes of her old existence. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Nora and Matthew stood outside under the vast Nevada sky, stars scattered like diamonds across the darkness. "Thank you," Nora said quietly, "for that day 11 years ago when you saw me standing alone on the street and decided to help. Thank you for giving me this life, this family, this second chance." "Thank you for saying yes," Matthew replied, pulling her close, "for trusting me when you had no reason to, for falling in love with me even though I was just a simple cowboy with more dreams than sense. You are so much more than that," Nora said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known. You are my husband, the father of my children, my partner in everything. You are my whole world, Matthew Quinn." He kissed her then, deep and sweet, and Nora felt the familiar flutter in her chest that his kisses always caused. Even after all these years, after 5 children and a lifetime of building this ranch together, he still made her heart race. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. The children grew up strong and healthy. Thomas proved to have his father's steady nature and skill with horses, eventually becoming Matthew's right-hand man on the ranch. Eleanor inherited her mother's fierce spirit and became a teacher in Silver Peak. Though she still helped on the ranch whenever she was needed, James showed an aptitude for numbers and business, helping Matthew expand the ranch's operations and increase their profits. And the twins, Margaret and Elizabeth, were inseparable, both of them showing early interest in following their older sister into teaching. When Nora turned 40 in 1903, Matthew threw her a surprise party that brought tears to her eyes. All 5 of their children were there, along with grandchildren now, as Thomas had married a local girl and already had 2 little ones of his own. Nora's mother, now in her 60s and somewhat frail, sat in a place of honor, holding her great-grandchildren and beaming with pride. Even more surprising, Thomas Jenkins attended. He was an old man now, his hair white and his body bent with age. He did not say much, but when Nora went to greet him, he placed a gnarled hand on her shoulder. "You did well for yourself, daughter," he said gruffly. "That Quinn is a good man. Treated you right." It was not an apology, not exactly, but coming from Thomas Jenkins, it was as close as Nora was ever going to get, and somehow that was enough. The old anger and hurt had faded over the years, worn smooth by time, and the overwhelming happiness of her life. She could afford to be gracious. "Thank you, Papa," she said simply. He nodded once, then moved away to talk to Matthew about cattle prices, but something had shifted, some final piece of the past falling into place. That night, as Nora and Matthew prepared for bed, she looked at herself in the mirror. She was 40 years old now, with lines around her eyes and silver beginning to thread through her brown hair. Her body bore the marks of bearing 5 children. She was no longer the frightened 19-year-old girl who had been cast out by her family. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I was thinking about how much has changed," Nora said, "and how much I have changed. That girl who stood on the street with nowhere to go seems like a different person now." "She was a different person," Matthew said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "but she was also the same person. Strong and brave and resilient, even when she did not know it. That girl grew into this amazing woman, and I have been honored to watch it happen." Nora turned in his arms, studying his face. He was 48 now, his dark hair liberally streaked with silver, his face more lined than when they had first married. But his blue eyes still held the same kindness, the same steady love that had drawn her to him all those years ago. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you for so long now that I cannot remember what it felt like not to love you." "I love you too," Matthew replied, "and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They had many more good years together. The ranch continued to prosper, eventually becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Their children all found their own paths in life, but they stayed close, raising their own families nearby. The Quinn name became synonymous with hard work, integrity, and family values throughout Silver Peak and beyond. When Matthew and Nora celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1932, it was a grand affair. All 5 of their children attended, along with 14 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren. The celebration was held at Second Chance Ranch, and people came from all over the county to honor the couple who had built such a legacy. Nora was 69 years old now, her hair snow-white, her body frail with age. Matthew, at 77, was still sharp-minded, though his body had slowed considerably. They sat in places of honor at the head of a long table surrounded by the family they had created. Thomas, now 50 years old and running the ranch day to day with his own sons, stood to give a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice strong and clear, "who taught us all what it means to love unconditionally, to work hard, and to never give up hope. Everything I am, everything we all are, comes from the foundation they built. To Matthew and Nora Quinn." "To Matthew and Nora," the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Later, as the party wound down and the younger generations dealt with cleanup and putting exhausted children to bed, Matthew and Nora slipped away to the porch. Their porch, where they had spent countless evenings over the past 50 years watching sunsets and talking about their days and their dreams. "We did it," Matthew said softly. "We built something that will last beyond us." "We did," Nora agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder as she had done so many times before. "We took a desperate situation and turned it into something beautiful. We created a family, a legacy, a life worth living." "I would do it all again," Matthew said, "every bit of it. I would marry you again in a heartbeat, Nora Quinn." "And I would say yes," Nora replied, "every single time." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Around them they could hear the sounds of their family, their legacy. Children laughing, adults talking, the comfortable sounds of home and family and love. This was what they had built from nothing. From one desperate morning on a dusty street in Silver Peak, from a cowboy's impulsive proposal and a frightened girl's courageous acceptance, from hard work and determination and unwavering love, they had created an empire of the heart. Matthew Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1935 at the age of 80. Nora, who had spent nearly every night of the past 53 years by his side, woke to find him gone and felt as though part of her own soul had departed with him. But even in her grief, she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the knowledge that Matthew's love had been real and lasting and had shaped every day of their lives together. She lived another 3 years, spending her final days surrounded by family, telling stories of the early days on Second Chance Ranch, of how a cowboy had saved a desperate girl and how they had saved each other right back. She spoke of love and second chances and the power of choosing kindness even when the world seemed cruel. Nora Quinn passed away in 1938 at the age of 75, with her children and grandchildren gathered around her bedside. Her last words were of Matthew, and the smile on her face as she took her final breath suggested that she was going to him at last. They buried her beside Matthew on a hill overlooking Second Chance Ranch, under the vast Nevada sky they had both loved so much. The ranch continued on, passed down through their children and grandchildren, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, compassion over judgment, and hope over despair. The story of Nora and Matthew Quinn became local legend, told and retold by generations of Silver Peak residents. The tale of the girl who was banished by her family for getting pregnant unwed, and the cowboy who married her that same week and loved her for the rest of his life. It was a story of redemption and second chances, of the transformative power of true love, and of the families we choose for ourselves when the families we are born to let us down. And though Nora and Matthew had long since passed from this world, their legacy lived on in the ranch they built, in the family they raised, and in the love story that proved that even in the hardest times, even when all seems lost, there is always hope for a second chance.